Good afternoon, good evening, good day, whatever it is for you guys. Today we're looking at performance and visual effects. We're going to be looking at how to monitor your frame rates, the impacts on performance depending on what you're doing within your scene, looking at different visual effects that you can add through things like bloom, which is a glow effect, ambient occlusion, colour and tonal adjustments for making your scene feel more in keeping with the universe you're trying to capture, and then also improving performance through things like occlusion culling, light baking and reflection and light probes. What you'll find with our machines in Coombswood is you're getting around 72 frames per second out of the box. With a template that you download, it gets about 72 frames per second. What I've got at the minute is I've set a scene up, which is a more complicated scene, but if I revert back to kind of the basic scene that we're usually using, our sample scenes, I've got a simple scene set up here. In the game window you can press stats, which is up here, and when you press play you will see your frame rate. Keep in mind I'm running a fairly powerful home machine at the moment, so you can see I'm getting the frame rate there, but notice I've not got my headset on right now. So I'm reporting about 600 frames per second there or thereabout. If I pop the headset on and the processing starts, you'll now see the frame rate has dropped substantially. So what you find is there's actually quite a substantial drop there, and you may find I'm getting no higher than 71, 72 frames per second. Why is that? We'll come back to that one in a second. So then I'm just going to go back to play mode, and we're going to go back to our more complicated scene, and that was in my abandoned scene. I think it was in here. There we go. And if we press play, we're going to do the same trick again with the stats view open, and we're going to look again what we're getting. Around 72 frames per second. For those of you in the know, you'll realise we've hit the limit of our monitor's output. There will be an upper limit to what you can output, and that is in this case 72 Hertz, 72 refresh calls, however you want to do it, whatever the monitor can output, you're limited to that. However, what we want is as many frames as possible, even if the monitor can't output them. So one of the things we're going to be looking at during development, if I just change some settings on my headset, I think the throttling factor there was it was also outputting to my monitor, which I think is limited to 72 Hz. Anyway, what we've got here and what's interesting to us for today's lesson is understanding that the more frames you can get out of your machine, the more headroom you've got if you're inefficient with it. So the impacts on performance that we've got right now are I've got a very complicated scene and I've got a very simple scene. Both of them had an upper frame rate, but if you add too much stuff and you start to really hurt your frame rates, there's no lower limit. If you continue to add and add and add content to your project, it will slow and slow and slow, but it will only slow based on what's in the current scene that's loaded. I've got Task Manager open at the moment, so you can right click and go Task Manager, and what Task Manager is currently reporting to me is the stats for this individual machine. Again, my CPU is not doing a huge amount at the minute. I've got a ridiculous amount of memory in this machine as well, and you can also see my graphics card is currently quite busy. It's handling what Unity is asking it to do, which is to output, well, this scene. So when we're actually in play mode, again, I'm just going to hit play, keep an eye on Task Manager, but I'm going to cover the headset as if I'm in play mode. Let me put this to one side so we can see that that's working. So with the headset on, I just need to re-establish the Quest link very quickly. There we go. With the headset on, you'll see that either the GPU or the CPU or both will spin up to meet the needs of what the computer is asking it to do. And you'll find that you can really find cases where if you've got a lot of geometry in your scene, so lots of complex 3D models or lots of particle effects or a lot of things going on, fire effects in particular, you can really hurt your frame rate. Remember, you get awarded more extra credits if you have good frame rates. Certainly 60 or above is what we're aiming for, and you can see that's, well, not really a spike, but an increase there in the GPU usage while I put it under load. So what we're interested in is finding techniques to simplify those things. So impacts on performance. Two of the principal things that will hurt your performance is a lot of light within your scene that are using real-time shadows, and also lots of geometry in your scene. So that's lots of 3D objects or complex 3D objects. We're going to have a look later on how to solve some of those problems through different techniques, but right now we're going to look at lighting and visual effects that we can use. So I've got this scene right now, and this is a nice scene. It took a long time to import. This is just an asset from the asset store. I certainly can't claim that I've built this. Really interesting environment that we've got, lots of things going on. But what I want to add is some visual effects to it. To do that, I'm going to go to the Package Manager, Window Package Manager. I'm going to go into the Unity registry, and we're going to add from the Unity registry the post-processing stack. Post-processing, there it is. I'm just going to install that very quickly. What this will give you access to is a series of tools to make your camera perform post-processing. If you're familiar with motion blur, or you're familiar with bloom, or you're familiar with ambient occlusion, they're all the things I'm going to show you how we can turn on. This will have a substantial performance impact on your game though. So if you are already spotting that your frame rates are dipping below 60 frames per second, this is not something perhaps you want to have a look at. But still, for those people who've got really beautiful looking scenes, perhaps they're set at night and you want a good glow effect or something like that, we're going to look at how we can apply that. The way you apply the post-processing stack is you create an empty game object which is going to monitor all of your post-processing. I'm going to call this post-FX, post-processing effects. The component you add is called the post-processing volume. This is a series of rules that you can set up for your post-processing, and if you want different areas to have different effects on your camera, you can do that. You can apply a collider, tell it to be a trigger, and if I just go over to this object now, you'll see that there is a zone that we can change the size of, like we can for any collider, and whenever the camera is inside of that zone, it will obey the rules we're going to set it. Or, in our case, we don't want that. We're going to have this apply globally to everything in our entire scene, so it will always affect what's going on. So with our post effects, we've just created that, but what it also needs is a profile, which is your series of properties that you want. I'm going to create a new profile. I don't really care what it's called, but you can now see that that popped up. Something happened down here. I think it popped up in the same scene. There it is. It created a new folder called the name of the scene profiles, and then created this thing here, which is the profile. You can also change the settings here just by adding effects and whatnot. It's a really easy thing. You don't care what it's called, it doesn't really matter. But we're going to add an effect using from the Unity tools, and we're going to start with bloom. Bloom is probably one of the most powerful features, and then you've got a drop down arrow which gives you all of your bloom tools. We've got things like intensity, threshold, and other properties as well, but for now I'm just going to turn intensity on, and nothing will happen no matter what I change, because we also need to inform the camera, which will be in your XR origin, the main camera there. We also need to inform it to be using post-processing and to be listening for these rules. To do that, we add a component and we look for the post-processing layer. And it gives us a bit of a warning down here once we've added it. It says no layer has been set. It's not going to be affected by any volumes. We've got to choose a layer, and it will warn us if we choose default. It'll say this is dumb, because it's basically trying to process everything, which is inefficient. Or we could tell it to do everything, or we could tell it to just use certain things in particular. I think we're going to stick with default for now, but you can change it to whatever you want. You know, we could set it to the player layer, but if you remember, that will only affect the player object. But I'm going to set it to everything or default, and just appreciate that we can be more efficient about it. It will slow down the process. So it says anything you want to be on post-processing, you should really put it on its own layer. So you could create, if I go back to default and turn off player, you could create a layer for all of your lights, which we're going to look at in a second. You can also apply anti-aliasing here. So one of the default things you can do is the type of anti-aliasing. Fast approximate anti-aliasing, FXAA, is a good compromise. It offers good performance and good effects. Anti-aliasing, if you don't know, is an effect where you can smooth jagged edges on the camera. One thing you will spot about VR when you put the headset on is jagged edges are very noticeable because it's so close to your face. When you apply anti-aliasing, that helps quite a bit. And if you find that performance is still an issue, there is an even faster version of it that you can click by clicking that. So that applies post-processing to this light, to this camera, and then under your post effects you can change your intensity, and again you'll notice nothing is happening yet. The way this works is Bloom looks for any kind of source of light that is an emitter or any source of light that's currently doing something. So to make Bloom work, I'm going to select one of these lights for an example, which is up here, and you can see because that's a pre-baked light, which we'll talk about a little bit, it's not going to work straight out of the box here. So I'm just going to create a simple 3D object which is going to represent our light source. I'm going to apply a texture to that, or material I should say. So I've got material folder and I'm going to create a simple material, and this material I'm just going to make it yellow. I'm going to apply that yellow material, so this new material which is yellow, on there, and again this won't do anything, but what we can do with our new material is we can make it emissive. So if I want this to be emissive, if I click that button, I can change the emission colour to again be a bright yellow, and that won't look very good until we look at our intensity value, and now you can see it glow. What Bloom does is it takes emissive materials and adds a glow to them through the camera. You won't always see this, but you can see there that these have got emissive materials on there as well, and you can see that that's got that effect. If I have a look at the threshold value, what you see, this is like the bottom threshold, and now you can see basically anything that's got any illumination, like the lighting or anything like that, it's really brightening it up. So what we can add is perhaps a low intensity, but also a very low threshold. So anything with some kind of brightness is getting picked up. Or perhaps we want a higher intensity, but a higher threshold. You know, it takes more glow to make it glow. And you've got a series of different properties, and again there's a fast mode if you want it to be slightly quicker, so more performant but at the exchange for quality, and you've got a series of other properties you can play with if you want to. But now what we're going to look at is another really powerful one, which is ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion darkens the edges of corners. So I want you to pay attention here to like the corners up here where the wall meets the ceiling, and down here where the stairs meet the floor. And if I turn the mode on, and if I set the intensity to a number, you can see that that is having an effect. What it's doing is it's finding those areas of intersection, and it's making the blend between them. And this is not just making the room darker, that's not what it's doing. It's finding those areas and it's adding it. So let's just try changing the properties here a little bit, because I certainly don't want that much intensity. I've got a thickness modifier which we can slide and scale as well. We've also got the colour that we can change, so if in your sci-fi game you wanted it to be a different tint at certain areas, you can see what that's doing, and that's having quite an interesting effect to the scene. But black is the default because that's the colour you'd expect it to be darker in a given area. So you can see that ambient occlusion may be appropriate for what it is you're trying to do. And again, different properties for different things. I think, there we go, that's kind of an effect I'm looking for. So I've just changed it to scale ambient obscurance. A relatively mid intensity, but now I can change the radius, how thick the darkened area is. So if I turn that off, you can see that it's quite bright at all times. If I turn it on, you'll see that it gives you that illusion of shadow without actually having any calculated lights going on. The other thing I wanted to show you here, there was a bunch of different things that you can do, but one of the other quite nice is colour grading. You've also got motion blur and other things as well, but basically let's have a look at colour grading. Colour grading, again, if we turn the mode on and choose the mode, colour space in project settings is set to gamma. It won't look correct, just warning you that the colour mode won't look accurate here. Let's turn the mode on. Let's choose ACES. ACES is a really good type of colour correction, and you can see again, because it's using the wrong type of lighting, it wants us to use linear in order for this to work. But let me just show you what this does in order to show it. So you can see I can just slide the temperature so it's more blue or more red, especially if you're after a horror game. Suddenly that's completely changed the tone enormously. You've got a tint it one way or the other, and you've also got the colour filter. Again, what these things do is basically down to experimentation. Have a play with it. If you like the result, keep it. If you don't, undo it. But let's just change this setting. So it's saying colour space in project settings is set to gamma. So edit and project settings, and it's complaining about colour space, which I think is a graphics thing. Could be a player thing. Player. I think it's around here somewhere. There you go. So this is under project settings, player, other settings, and the color space is set to gamma. I'm going to try setting it to linear, change it to linear. May have to restart some elements. Hopefully not too long, because I can't be bothered to wait forever. I have a horrible feeling this is going to take forever. Feel free to skip forward to the part of the video where the loading bar finishes. But hopefully what you can see here is the different types of post-processing options that we have. I'm really regretting clicking that button. If I had any editing competence, I would edit this bit out. Imagine a clever bit of editing happening now. Imagine it's sped up. Really regretting clicking that button. Can I stop it? No. Join me for part 2 when we carry on with today's project.